What did he just say? That was the question that rolled across the entire hearing room like a sharp gust of cold air. People froze. A few reporters looked at each other with wide eyes. Some staffers even stopped typing. Because Senator J.D. Vance had just said something that no one in that room expected to hear from a sitting United States senator. He had called feeding families absurd. The word did not float calmly in the air. It hit the room like a dropped weight. Heavy. Loud. Echoing. And everyone knew, deep inside, that this moment was not going to pass quietly. This was the kind of moment that set something on fire. The kind people replay over and over on the news. The kind that sparks anger, shock, and disbelief. Especially among Americans who understood what real struggle looked like. And sitting a few seats down from the chairman was the one person no one wanted to provoke, Representative Jasmine Crockett. She heard the word. She felt it. And she slowly reached for her microphone with a calmness that told everyone something serious was about to happen. That familiar look came over her face, the look that people across America had seen before. The look that said, "This is not going to end well for someone." Before we go deeper into what happened next, remember to like this video, hit subscribe, and tell us your city in the comments. It helps the channel so much, and we love hearing where our listeners are from. Today's story is powerful. And you will want to hear every second of it. Now, back to the room. The chairman began calling on the next speaker, trying to keep the schedule moving. But Crockett's voice cut through the room with a calm, firm tone. "Mr. Chairman, I would like to respond to Senator Vance's comment before we move forward." Everything stopped. The chairman hesitated. He knew this would derail the schedule. But he also knew that denying her would look terrible on camera. So he nodded. "The chair recognizes Representative Crockett from Texas." J.D. Vance straightened in his seat. He looked confident. He always looked confident. He had built an entire political identity on being bold, tough, unbothered. He probably thought this would be another easy moment. Just another debate where he could repeat the same points he always made about budgets and government spending. But he had no idea what he had just walked into. Crockett leaned toward her microphone, calm and steady. "Senator Vance, I want to be sure I heard you correctly. You called the court decision requiring Ohio to restore SNAP benefits to 340,000 people absurd. Did I hear that right?" Vance smiled slightly, like someone being given an easy question. "Yes, Congresswoman. I think it's absurd for an unelected judge to override state decisions about welfare programs. This is about fiscal responsibility." Crockett raised her hand gently. "Let me stop you, Senator. I did not ask about unelected judges. I did not ask about budgets. I asked about food. I asked whether you called feeding people absurd." The room shifted. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer. Because Crockett had just changed the direction of the entire conversation. Vance wanted to talk about process. Crockett wanted to talk about people. Real people. Hungry people. People who depend on food stamps to make it to the next day. Her voice was calm, but sharp. "So I want to be very clear. Are you saying it is absurd to provide food to 340,000 Ohioans?" The room held its breath. Vance's confidence wavered. Just a flicker. But it was noticeable. "I'm saying the court's reasoning was absurd, Congresswoman. The fiscal impact." Crockett leaned in again. "Senator, I am a lawyer. I read the decision. The judge found that Ohio's actions violated federal law. That eligible families were illegally denied food assistance. That is not fiscal. That is legal. So tell me, Senator, why is it absurd to follow the law when the law says we must feed people?" A quiet ripple moved across the room. Reporters typed faster. Cameras zoomed. Staffers glanced around nervously. Vance swallowed. Crockett reached into a folder. And anyone who had watched her before knew that this was the moment things were about to get serious. Because when Jasmine Crockett brought out paperwork, it meant she had facts ready to land like bricks. She held up a page. These numbers come from Ohio's own data, Senator. Let me explain who those 340,000 people are. The room leaned in. 62% of them are working. They have jobs. They earn money. But they don't earn enough to afford rent and food at the same time. 23% are elderly or disabled. 12% are children. Children, Senator. She paused and looked directly into his eyes. So when you call it absurd to feed these people, which group is the absurd one? The workers who can't afford groceries? The elderly choosing between medicine and meals? The disabled who cannot work full-time? Or the children who had no choice in any of this? The room went silent. Vance shifted again. His confidence drained a little more. That's not fair, Congresswoman. Crockett raised a second document. Let's talk about cost. SNAP costs $8.70 per person per day. $8.70. Less than some people spend at Starbucks. That feeds Americans. She pulled out another sheet. Meanwhile, the Pentagon budget is $887 billion. Corporate subsidies are $150 billion. Tax evasion costs us $1 trillion. Her voice sharpened. But you are not calling those things absurd, Senator. You are calling food absurd. There were murmurs across the room. Deep, uncomfortable murmurs. Crockett turned to another document. 1 in 8 people in Ohio relies on SNAP. 1 in 8, Senator. That is your state. She tapped the page, and when SNAP money goes out, it boosts the state economy by $5.4 billion. Because poor families spend every dollar. They spend it at grocery stores. They support workers. They support farmers. They support local businesses. Vance looked rattled now. Truly rattled. He blinked hard and looked down. Crockett's tone softened, but the softness made the impact even stronger. And now let's talk about your book, Senator. Your very famous book about growing up poor. In that book, you wrote about relying on food stamps. You said you would not have survived without government help. Your exact words. Vance swallowed again. His eyes darted down to the table. Crockett read from the page. There were times we survived on food stamps and government cheese. Your words, Senator. She looked up. You needed help. Your grandmother needed help. The government fed you when you were hungry. But now that you're a senator with a book deal and wealth and power, you call it absurd to help other families. The silence that followed was heavy. Almost physical. Crockett continued. I think what's actually absurd is that the richest country in history spends time debating whether people deserve to eat. Her voice grew stronger, but still calm. I think it's absurd that politicians who benefited from government programs turn around and attack those same programs. Her eyes locked onto his. So tell me, Senator Vance. When did helping families become absurd in America? The room erupted. Democrats applauded. Republicans stared at the desk. Reporters typed like their keyboards were on fire. J.D. Vance opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. Because there was nothing he could say. He had said the word. He had called feeding families absurd. And Jasmine Crockett had made sure America understood exactly what that meant. And as cameras flashed and the hearing spiraled into chaos, one question stayed hanging in the room like a thick cloud. How would J.D. Vance answer a question that millions of Americans had been waiting to hear? The question hung there like lightning that refused to fade. Everyone felt it. Everyone saw it. And everyone knew that Senator J.D. Vance had no real way out. Not now. Not after the word absurd had been replayed in homes, offices, and phones across the country. How would J.D. Vance answer a question that millions of Americans had been waiting to hear? The room waited. Silent. Heavy. Cameras locked on his face. Staffers froze. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Vance shifted in his seat, trying to find a place for his eyes to land. He looked at the desk, then at the papers in front of him, then at the ceiling, anywhere except at Jasmine Crockett. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Congresswoman, I believe my comments were being taken out of context." Crockett didn't say a word. She didn't even move. She simply watched him with calm eyes that said, "Go ahead. Try." Vance continued, stumbling slightly. "I was speaking about judicial overreach. Not about feeding people. I would never suggest that people should go hungry." A reporter from the back whispered, loud enough for several to hear. "He's already losing." And he was. You could see the shift. You could feel it. The energy in the room told the whole story. J.D. Vance was fighting to reclaim control, but the moment had slipped out of his hands like water. Crockett finally spoke, her voice soft. "Senator, let me ask you something simple. Very simple. When you say the ruling was absurd, what exactly is absurd? Feeding people? Enforcing the law? Ensuring children have meals? Or making sure elderly people don't collapse from hunger?" Vance opened his mouth again, but Crockett continued before he could speak. "Because I want you to answer clearly. For the record, for the cameras. For the people in your state who watched you call their lifeline absurd." The phrase "for the people in your state" echoed through the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably. They knew what she meant. Ohioans. Working families. Veterans. Seniors. Single mothers. Disabled Americans. People who needed help. People who would vote. Vance tried again. "I respect the need to help families." Crockett leaned in again. "No, Senator. Respect is not what you said. Absurd is what you said. And words matter." Her tone was steady. Controlled. Almost gentle. But each word landed like a hammer. She continued. "You wrote a book telling America how hard your childhood was. You told us about hunger. You told us about struggle. You told us about needing help. So I think it is fair to ask you why the help you needed is suddenly absurd now." Vance swallowed and tried to gather himself. "Congresswoman, I simply believe states should have the authority." Crockett held up her hand again. "States should have the authority to do what, Senator? Deny food to people who legally qualify? Break federal law? Push families into deeper poverty? Because that is what the judge said Ohio did. Violated federal law. Denied people food who were legally eligible." She paused. "Is following the law absurd to you?" The room buzzed again. Someone gasped quietly. A staffer closed their eyes for a moment as if bracing for impact. And all the while, cameras continued recording every blink, every swallow, every twitch of discomfort from J.D. Vance. He rubbed his forehead. "No, Congresswoman, I'm not saying that." "Then what are you saying?" Crockett asked softly. Vance stared at the table again. For the first time since he entered politics, he looked like a man who wished he could step out of his own skin. The confidence was gone. The swagger was gone. Even the practiced smile was gone. The only thing left was the weight of his own words. Crockett continued. "Let's talk about real people. Real faces. Real stories. Not talking points." She opened another file. "Here is a letter from a woman in Ohio. She works 2 jobs. She has 3 children. Her SNAP benefits were cut even though she met federal requirements. She wrote that she cried in the car because she didn't know how to feed her kids. That she started skipping meals so they could eat. That she prayed something would change." Crockett looked up. You called that absurd? Vance shook his head quickly. I did not call. You used the word, Senator, Crockett said calmly. You said it. You did not call the system absurd. You did not call the paperwork absurd. You did not call the process absurd. You called the ruling absurd. The ruling that fed people. That is what the judge ordered. Feed them. Her voice grew even softer. You called feeding them absurd. You could hear a pin drop. Crockett pulled another page. Here is a story about an elderly man from Columbus. Vietnam veteran. Lives alone. Lost benefits. Spent days eating crackers and canned soup because that's all he could stretch his money to buy. She held up the page. He said he felt forgotten. She lowered the page. You called his lifeline absurd. Vance looked down. His voice cracked a little. Congresswoman, I have great respect for veterans. Crockett's voice sharpened. Then why is their food absurd? Why is children's food absurd? Why is a disabled person's food absurd? Why is a working mother's food absurd? Why is a hungry family's food absurd? Her voice slowed. When did compassion become absurd? Vance closed his eyes for a moment. A reporter whispered to another. He is done. Crockett wasn't done. She reached for the last paper in the folder. This one is from your book. Your own words. Words that millions of Americans have read. She read slowly. There were times we survived on food stamps and government cheese. Without that help, I don't know what would have happened to us. She folded the page neatly. So I want to ask you again. A child you once were received help. That help fed you. That help kept you healthy. That help kept you going. And now the same help given to others is absurd? Vance tried to speak. Congresswoman, it's not the same. It is exactly the same, Crockett said. You were a hungry kid. These are hungry kids. You were a struggling family. These are struggling families. You needed help. They need help. Her voice deepened. Why is it absurd for them but not absurd for you? The room exploded with murmurs. The chairman tried to bring order, but it was too late. The moment had become bigger than the room. Bigger than the hearing. Bigger than the politics. And Vance knew it. He attempted to give a long explanation about budgets, spending, state control, and policy design, but his voice shook. His eyes darted around. His sentences stumbled. None of it mattered. Because Crockett had done what she always did. She took a complicated issue and made it simple. She turned a policy debate into a moral question. She turned a political argument into a human one. She turned J.D. Vance's own story against him. America loves simple truths. And Crockett had delivered one. People deserve to eat. The moment went viral within hours. Millions watched. Millions shared. Millions commented. People from Ohio, Texas, Florida, California, and all across America typed. She's right. She said what needed to be said. She spoke for us. Residents sent letters. Veterans groups spoke out. Churches spoke out. Grocery workers spoke out. SNAP recipients spoke out. The story spread like a wildfire carried by truth. But as the hearing continued, another moment was building. Something even heavier. Something even deeper. Something that would push J.D. Vance into a corner he could not escape. Because Crockett wasn't done. Not even close. She had one more point to make. One more truth to reveal. One more question that would shake the room again. And in part 3, everything comes out. Everyone leaned forward at the same time. It was like the whole room moved together. People who were sitting up straight leaned in even closer. People who were taking notes stopped writing. And for a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Because when the room heard that Crockett had one more thing to say, everyone knew this last part would not be gentle. It would not be soft. It would not be easy. It would be the kind of truth that lands with a weight you feel in your chest. J.D. Vance stared at her with tired eyes. He looked like he had aged in the last 20 minutes. His posture had changed. His shoulders were lower. His voice was gone. And he looked like a man waiting for the next wave to hit him. Crockett took a slow breath. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The room was already holding on to every second. Senator Vance. There is something I need to ask you. Something that may be uncomfortable. But it is necessary. The soft tone made the moment even heavier. Crockett continued. Do you remember the story you told in your book about your mother? The story about her struggling? The story about how your family lived on the edge? Vance blinked. His throat tightened. His book had been praised. It had made him famous. It had opened doors. And now, that same book was becoming the rope pulling him into the truth he didn't want to face. Crockett opened the book again, slowly. You wrote. For a long time, the only thing that kept food on our table was help from the government. She paused. That help fed you. That help saved your family. And today, you call that same help absurd. The impact was immediate. Someone in the audience whispered, he can't come back from this. Another shook their head slowly. Reporters typed so fast that the clicking sounded like rain. Crockett leaned closer to the microphone. Senator, this is not about politics. This is not about party. This is not about budgets. This is about people. About families. About hunger. About fairness. About compassion. Her voice softened even more. Senator, you are a man who was helped by the safety net. A man who knows the pain of an empty refrigerator. A man who knows what it feels like to wonder where the next meal will come from. She lowered the book. So why did you forget? The question didn't just strike him. It struck the whole room. It struck everyone watching on live stream. It struck everyone on social media. Because it was the one question he could not explain away with numbers or charts or talking points. Why did you forget? Vance rubbed the bridge of his nose. His voice shook. I haven't forgotten. I just. Crockett's voice interrupted softly. Then show us. Show us you haven't forgotten. Show us you still understand. Show us you have not lost compassion for the people who are living the life you lived. Her eyes softened again, but the softness carried truth like a blade. Because if a child who grew up hungry becomes a man who calls feeding hungry people absurd, then something went wrong along the way. Something broke. Something shifted. Something got lost. The room was dead silent. You could almost feel people holding their breath. Crockett continued, her tone steady and heart-centered. Senator Vance, I want to tell you something personal. I come from a community where many people struggle. I have seen families choose which bills to pay. I have seen mothers cry in grocery store parking lots. I have seen seniors stretch cans of soup for 3 days. And what they need from us is not judgment. Not shame. Not labels. They need help, they need compassion. They need leaders who remember their own stories. Vance looked down at his hands. His fingers were trembling. Crockett continued. When you call a ruling absurd, you are not talking about paperwork. You are talking about families. You are talking about dinner tables. You are talking about children. You are talking about dignity. She lifted another document. Here is a photo of a child in Ohio. The child's name is hidden for privacy. But this child's mother wrote that SNAP is the only reason she can pack lunch every day. She held up the photo. Is that absurd? The question hung in the air. Vance looked away. Crockett placed the photo on the table gently, like she was placing a fragile truth where everyone could see it. Let me tell you something else. SNAP fraud is less than 1%. You know what that means, Senator? It means almost every person receiving help is someone who truly needs it. She lifted another paper. And do you know what happens when we cut benefits? Hunger rises. Hospital visits rise. Mental health crises rise. Child development suffers. Schools struggle. Crime rises. Local economies shrink. People get sick. People fall behind. People lose hope. She paused again. So what exactly is absurd here, Senator? Feeding people? Or the idea that in the richest country in human history, we still debate feeding people? The room felt like it was spinning slower and slower. Crockett took a breath, then delivered the final blow. Senator Vance. This is not just about Ohio. This is about America. This is about who we are as a nation. Are we a country that lets children go hungry? Or are we a country that feeds our own? She pointed at the cameras. Because America is watching right now. And America is waiting to hear what kind of country we want to be. The chairman tried to speak, but Crockett continued, louder now, powered by truth, emotion, and purpose. Senator Vance, you once wrote that food assistance saved you. And today, millions of families are asking why you want to take that same help away from them. And until you answer that, nothing you say about budgets or judges or policy will matter. Vance looked up finally, but his eyes were glassy. He looked at Crockett, then at the cameras, then at the audience. But he had no answer. Not one. All he could say was, Congresswoman, I didn't mean to call feeding people absurd. I misspoke. Crockett nodded slowly. Then say it clearly, Senator. Right now. On the record. Feeding people is not absurd. Say it. Vance swallowed hard. It's not absurd. Crockett leaned forward. Say feeding 340,000 Ohioans was not absurd. Vance struggled. It was not absurd. Crockett sat back calmly. Good. Now let's build policy that matches that truth. The room exploded with noise, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, members murmuring, staffers rushing. But the moment was sealed. J.D. Vance had been pushed into admitting what millions already knew. Feeding people is not absurd. What was absurd was that he ever said otherwise. The hearing ended, but America did not. Clips spread like wildfire. Commentators analyzed every sentence. Churches preached sermons about compassion. Veterans groups released statements. Parents shared their stories. Workers shared their struggles. Grandparents spoke up. Communities rallied. Jasmine Crockett's moment became a movement. A simple truth became a national conversation. If we don't feed our own people, who are we? J.D. Vance avoided interviews for days. His staff scrambled to fix the damage. But the public had already made up its mind. Words matter. Compassion matters. People matter. Food matters. Crockett's final question spread across America like a message written in the sky. When did helping families become absurd in America? And people everywhere answered. It never was. Before we close this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us what you think about this moment. Your voice matters. Your engagement helps us grow. And your support helps us tell more stories that shine light on truth, justice, and humanity. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.